Every movement in nature requires fuel, whether it is the energy needed to grow a massive oak tree or the explosive force required to power a predator's strike. It all has to come from somewhere. But where does this biological fuel actually originate, and how does it move through a living forest? The entire system starts with the sun, but animals cannot eat sunlight. That job belongs exclusively to autotrophs, organisms like green plants and algae. They act as nature's dedicated food factories, capturing raw solar radiation and physically converting it into stored chemical energy. Every other living thing on Earth is a heterotroph. Because heterotrophs cannot manufacture their own food, they survive entirely by stealing the sun's stored energy from other organisms. Nature divides these energy thieves into specific roles. Herbivores steal directly from plants. Carnivores steal from the herbivores. Omnivores will take energy from both. And when any of them die, saprotrophs, or decomposers, step in to extract the very last drops of nutrients from their remains. The easiest way to map this theft is with a food chain. As we see in this diagram, energy moves in a straight line. The grass captures the sun's energy, a rabbit consumes the grass, and a fox consumes the rabbit. Biologists categorize these steps as trophic levels. The plant is the producer at the first level, the rabbit is the primary consumer at the second level, and the fox acts as the secondary consumer at the third. This straight-line model makes it incredibly easy to track who eats whom. However, it is a dangerous oversimplification. In the real world, the math of a rigid chain falls apart, and ecosystems would struggle to survive under such a fragile structure. A straight-line food chain lacks backups. If a disease wipes out the rabbit population, the fox has no alternative fuel source. It starves, and that specific chain ends entirely. Real environments rely on a food web. Looking at this network of a pond ecosystem, we see that organisms do not rely on a single food source. An eagle might eat a snake, but it will also eat a frog, a mouse, or a small bird. When a localized area experiences a disruption, the system adapts. If the frog population drops, the energy pathways instantly reroute. The predators shift their diet to insects or rodents, keeping the upper levels of the web fueled and active. This staggering biological complexity acts as an insurance policy. By overlapping thousands of different feeding pathways, nature builds a resilient structure, highly capable of defending itself against mass starvation. But this resilience introduces a mathematical contradiction. If food webs are so vast and adaptable, why do we see millions of insects in a forest, but only a handful of tigers? The answer lies in the 10% rule. Every time energy transfers from one organism to another, there is a massive physical cost. When a rabbit eats a plant, 90% of the consumed energy is burned immediately to keep the rabbit warm, moving, and breathing. Only 10% is actually stored in its tissues. When the fox eats the rabbit, it only gets 10% of that remaining energy. Because of this severe energy loss, ecosystems are forced into a rigid physical structure, an ecological pyramid. To push enough residual energy to the top, the base must be massive. It takes thousands of millet plants to generate enough stored energy to support a few dozen mice, and it takes all of those mice to provide enough biological fuel to sustain just one eagle. Apex predators are rare because the math allows no other outcome. By the time the sun's energy filters up through 4 or 5 trophic levels, the ecosystem simply runs out of fuel. Because the upper levels of the pyramid are so fuel-starved, they are incredibly sensitive to disruption. Removing a single critical species from this structure triggers what biologists call cascading effects. Consider the sea otter. In the kelp forests of the Pacific, the otter acts as a keystone species, a single organism holding the entire web together. Otters eat sea urchins, and urchins eat kelp. If you remove the otter from the top of this pyramid, the urchin population is left unchecked. They multiply without limit, entirely devouring the kelp base. Without the producers, the pyramid collapses from the bottom up. We see this same mechanical failure on land. In the 1980s, India was a significant exporter of the Indian bullfrog for the global food market. By artificially removing this mid-level predator, the insect populations they normally kept in check exploded. Farmers suddenly faced devastating agricultural pest outbreaks and were forced to dump synthetic chemicals into their fields to compensate. Removing a single species from an ecosystem unleashes a destructive shockwave that can collapse the entire pyramid. Nature's laws govern human-made environments as strictly as wild forests. A commercial wheat field is an ecosystem bound by the same mathematical rules of energy transfer. When human activity drives deforestation, overhunts apex predators, or introduces chemical runoff into rivers, we force unnatural bottlenecks into these energy pathways. We isolate our food webs and starve the upper trophic levels of the fuel they need. Understanding the mechanics of food webs and ecological pyramids provides a blueprint for protecting biodiversity, preventing ecological collapse, and ensuring global food security.